Okay, well, welcome everybody to Social Work Practice with Veterans with our alumni panel. Thanks for coming out. I know it's preparation for finals time, so hopefully everything is going well for you with that. And it means a lot that you were able to come out here and be here for this panel. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First to my left, I have Shaun Henry, and in the middle, Elizabeth Grillo Gargano, and Heidi Peck. And I thought we would start the evening by asking each of our panelists to talk a little bit about where they work and the work that they do. So just a few minutes of that. Go ahead, Shaun.
Okay, I am working out of the St. Albans CLC Community Living Center with the HUD-VASH program. And what that is a joint partnership between the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the VA Supportive Housing. So what we're actually doing is part of the President's plan to end homelessness. And the first part of the plan is to end it with veterans. And it's a 5-year plan. We're currently in year 3 of that plan. And pretty much veterans who are receiving services through the VA and qualify either due to a substance abuse, due to a medical issue, they qualify for the program if they fall within a certain income limit. And they are awarded a Section 8 voucher from the local housing authority. And pretty much that voucher is good for life. They can take that to any part of the country as long as they fall within those income guidelines. And then we are, as case managers, we provide the support to prevent them from becoming homeless again. So, you know, that may be just working with them on money management, connecting them with other services, and making sure that they're taking care of their substance abuse problem or mental health issues or medical issues.
Thank you, Shaun.
I currently work in Baltimore, Maryland, and I am in a community living center, which is the VA's new name for nursing homes. It's part of the nationwide cultural transformation to make them more home-like and really change the old school thinking about them being dirty, old, crummy nursing homes. And I work on an inpatient geriatric unit, so most of my residents have dementia. It's a wander unit, which means we have a wander guard system so they could kind of roam around freely but not get injured or walk out into the street. There's about 43 residents on that unit, and I also actually just received a promotion, so that's good. And I'll be moving to a different wing of that facility, working in the 12-bed inpatient hospice unit, and I'll be responsible for education about hospice and palliative care in our nursing home, community living center, another community living center, and 2 medical centers. So, you know, hospice and palliative care comes into play throughout the diagnosis of someone's illness. So a lot of it is symptom management, end-of-life planning, life review. There's a good deal of case management towards the end in terms of benefits and burial planning. That's it in a nutshell.
I'm Heidi. You have to excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so just want to get that out of the way. If I cough, sorry, the hole's in my mouth. And also, in case, you know, we get too into this veteran thing, I do want to say good luck to you all on your finals. I work at the Harlem Community-based outpatient clinic and community resource referral center. It's a small outpatient clinic in Harlem on 125th between Lenox and 5th. I previously worked at the Brooklyn VA for a bunch of years in the outpatient ambulatory substance abuse program and the inpatient detoxification unit and psychiatric unit at the Brooklyn VA. My background is in substance abuse and mental health counseling. While I'm at Harlem, I always say I do everything, social work generalist. It's a primary care clinic, so people come for their primary care, and I basically see what's going on with each veteran that belongs to the clinic, meet with them, find out what's going on with them from a social work perspective, any issues that they have, I always let the veterans know. I like to know about it first so that we keep it in the clinic in terms of the holistic approach, not just medical, but mental health as well. And I'll refer, if something I don't do directly, like housing, employment, what I do is I'll refer them to someone else with the VA along with the information, but then I meet with the veteran back to make sure they got their needs met, and it's not just like, oh, here's a name, number, call me if you need me kind of thing. That's my morning gig. In the afternoon, I do life of a social worker, right?
Yeah.
No. In the afternoon, I have patients I see individual for mental health counseling, and also engagement into treatment. And I also take referrals from outside community, and the community resource and referral center falls around doing A, homeless triage, and B, being a kind of broker or go-to person for other veterans organizations, including the Harlem Vet Center, which is a different entity from us, being the person who kind of represents the clinic in a way, and also fields the referrals and walks them through the step-by-step process of like getting registered for the VA, having their medical appointment, and setting up care.
Some people come, you were all in the MSW program, graduating at different times, and some people come into the program knowing exactly what they want to do, and then some people come into the program and then whatever happens, happens, and they fall in love with a particular area of social work. So I'd like to throw out a question asking you, where were you when you came in as a student, and how did that possibly lead you to this field, if it did at all?
Okay, I was in the OIR program, so I was actually working with the Administration for Children's Services. I was actually there for about 10 years prior to going to the VA. You know, I left the VA a little over 2 years ago, and you know, left city government for federal just because of the opportunities. Kind of felt like I maxed out as far as what I can really do with ACS, because I didn't really have an interest in becoming a commissioner. So as far as clinical work, there wasn't much I could do there. But the VA pretty much opened up a lot more doors for me and opportunities.
I knew exactly what I wanted to do in high school, and I knew, so I have a little bit different story, but so when I came into NYU, I came as an advanced standing student. I had already been a volunteer at the VA for a number of years. To bring it back a little bit more, in high school I took a class called Literature of the Vietnam War. I'm going to put a plug here, it's just my personal plug. I read the book, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and that was it. I was sold. I was going to be social work veterans. No one could stop me. So then I went to Adelphi for my undergrad, and they were saying, hey, if you stay here for grad school, guarantee you a placement with the VA for your internship. And I was like, well, that's really great. They give a stipend. A lot of times they hire interns. And then I got accepted to NYU, which actually had waitlisted me and then rejected me for undergrad. And they said, well, if you come here, we can't guarantee you that you get a placement with the VA, but we want you to come here. And I made that decision, which I was very happy about. So throughout my time here as an advanced standing student, which was only a year, sometimes I wish it was longer, believe it or not, because I really enjoyed my time here, I was able to volunteer at the VA and then eventually submit my application and get in. But I knew, and I kind of took classes, and I also knew I liked end-of-life care and hospice, and that was, you know, I took the electives that were available here and kind of knew where I wanted to go with it.
I'll take choice B. When I came to NYU, I knew I wanted to do social work. I previously, for my undergraduate, studied political science and social work, and I was a fellow at Eagleton Institute of Politics and had a short-lived career in politics. And the only conscious decision I made at the time really was, besides coming to NYU, was that I wanted to not push papers. I wanted to work with the people that the policies affect first, and then perhaps go into that side later, if at all. But I had worked on Capitol Hill, and I felt like I wanted kind of I know this is like gonna sound silly because we're talking about veterans, but for lack of a better term, like in the trenches kind of work. So, sorry. And, you know, so I came to NYU following my advanced standing program, which was 1 year. I actually took a job that I got from a job fair, and I was set to start before I graduated, like immediately right after I graduated. I went in to a job over at Union Square at a private outpatient substance abuse clinic, and then from that, this is the crazy part. No, I'm just kidding. I was working there and living with 3 of my classmates from my advanced standing program. One of them was working with me at the other job because I had brought her in once I got that job. And she did her internship at NYU. And she moved to Boston. So when they called her, because the position had opened, she passed it on to me. And I had interviewed there. And the rest is history.
Great story. Do any of you have people in your family that are or were in the military, or were you ever in the military, and does that affect your practice in any way?
I don't have any direct family. I have a few cousins that served some time in the military, but no.
I do. I have my uncle is a Vietnam War veteran who was injured in combat. He was a helicopter pilot. He was shot in the head. He's had PTSD for a number of years. He continues to work on it, but I remember hearing about that when I was younger. So that was always kind of something that I've been around. My grandfather is a very strong, proud World War II veteran. He was in the Navy. And actually my husband is active duty in the Navy now, and I've known him way before I even wanted to be a social worker or knew I wanted to work with veterans. It just kind of how the stars are aligned. But that plays a big role in my day-to-day practice with veterans. I feel like I have a kind of inside scoop on some of their lingo and their culture and their language, and I understand it from a social work perspective, but also as a family member and as a wife who deals with it every day.
I myself am not a veteran. I do have family members that are veterans, and it was a huge part of my life growing up. Both my grandfathers were well-decorated veterans, and they were also involved in like outside organizations a lot. You know, president of the Lions Club, that kind of stuff. That was one of my grandpas. My other grandpa, that whole side of the family was in the military. They rarely spoke about it, but he had PTSD. The whole basement was like all military memorabilia that we would play with and run around with, and he would watch old war movies and sleep in a recliner every night. And the crazy thing about that is this was like the aha social work moment where I'm like working at the VA for at least a few years now, and then I was like, oh, that makes sense how I ended up here, because it was like a huge part of my early childhood in my life.
You never know when that'll come back. And,
yeah.
I know that some of you have worked only in that area, and some of you come from other government agencies or private agencies. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between, let's say, working for the federal government and working in a private agency? What are some of the advantages and some of the disadvantages that you may have as social workers?
Okay, I could go first.
Sorry.
Some of the advantages are, let's see, one of the things that I like a lot is there's a real sense of camaraderie among the veterans, and they're really able to help one another and rely on one another and network amongst each other because they know each other from the outside. So like they can help each other in many ways in terms of looking for treatment or being peer support, which there's been a lot of studies that show that peer support is really instrumental in people getting well in many aspects. Also, I think that there was a component, like when I worked in outpatient treatment in a private clinic, it was a great place, but sometimes you'd get people and they'd go a little, and here like they the veterans, for the most part, there's like a code of conduct that they adhere to more so than any outpatient clinic, because it's like, if I go to an outpatient clinic and something happens and blah, 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 then I'm just gonna be told not to go back there. Here, actually, it might mean you don't have medical care from all VA facilities. So there's a certain like decorum and there's a certain code of conduct that exists as a positive thing, I think, within the VA, different than with outpatient. My personal transition from a private outpatient to government work hasn't been the most bright and cheery. You know, the bottom line is like you have supervisors, but like your boss is the federal government, so that sometimes can get a little tricky. I myself am openly gay, and working for the federal government hasn't always been like, you know, a bundle of roses or whatever, and I've had my own conflicts about feeling like supporting an organization that doesn't support me or my family, because there's no federal law against discrimination for LGBT employees. So there's definitely a conflict there, but overall in terms of their care modalities, which is what we're here to talk about, not me, you know, it's like there's a lot of things that are offered within one system as opposed to private, which is really awesome. Like if you could go somewhere and have like, I mean, we would love healthcare like this, right? You could go somewhere, you could have your dentist, your doctor, your therapist, your dermatologist all in the same building, and they could all talk to each other really easily and have access to a common chart. It really makes kind of a seamless transition in terms of healthcare from like a multidisciplinary perspective, and also a very unique system to work in. I'm
one of those people that went straight to the VA after grad school. I actually did work for JASA Meals on Wheels, because I'm originally from New York, for like 2 months after grad school, and then the VA called me and I scooped it up. But so I actually worry if I ever have to leave the VA, it's going to be a whole other world that I have nothing, no idea about. But something that I think is very special about the VA, in addition to some of the things that Heidi said, is that the VA really, it's not a perfect system. It's a huge, huge system. And there's a saying, and I can say that because I've worked in New York and Maryland in the VA, you've been to one VA, oh no, how does it go?
You've been to one VA, then you've been to one VA.
Exactly, that's the saying, sorry. And it's really true, because, Harlem versus St. Albans versus Brooklyn, they're all going to be different. But the VA as a whole, I really have seen in the 4.5 years I've worked for them that they really are trying to improve themselves. And they're not perfect, and they've made mistakes in the past, but they really are doing good research, on, especially with our OIF veterans, Iraqi, Afghanistan veterans that are coming back, traumatic brain injuries. They really are trying. They're being innovative. They have like apps for your iPhone now to measure like your PTSD symptoms. They've expanded service dogs to include mental health conditions. So even from the 4 years that I've been there, I've seen them kind of, quote unquote, get with the times and meet the new veterans where they are and say, okay, we know we maybe messed up with Vietnam or World War II or Korean War veterans, but we want to try to do it right this time. And I think that that's one of the proudest things that I see with the VA, that I'm proud of for the VA. And it's different than the civilian world.
I definitely agree with what Liz and Heidi have said. Coming from a city agency, there's a lot of similarities just because of its government. And so not much has changed moving from ACS to the VA. So that kind of helps me to kind of put things into perspective when I see kind of red tape and, certain situations happening. But, the VA, having that one VA feel, the ability to be mobile, I think is a great advantage to working for the VA, because, say you want to move to Hawaii. I have a colleague that just, moved to Hawaii and moved to the VA in Hawaii. It was just, a matter of finding an opening there and getting a switch. So that mobility is great, and the benefits are great. So, you know, it's for a federal job, you know, this is just, you know, all the things that attract you. But government is government, and it's going to function well at times and, you know, be frustrating at others. But
Do you find, you know, you're doing all different kinds of work, casework and some clinical work, and have you encountered any feelings of secondary trauma? Is that an issue for any of the social workers in the field that are working with veterans? How do you handle it?
I think as long as you're an empathic person, you're going to have that secondary trauma. And I think self-care is absolutely key. I work in end-of-life care. So a lot of our veterans, I work in geriatrics and end-of-life care, and they kind of cross paths, as you can imagine. But it's at the end of life, I've seen a lot of times old trauma comes up for the veterans again, and it's very hard when you have, you know, a 97-year-old veteran who's dying and you just want to make him comfortable. That's the goal of hospice, is to keep them comfortable. And he's seeing, you know, Germans under his bed, and he's seeing rifles, you know, coming at him, and he's feeling fire, and you really have a hard time making him comfortable because you can't fix that at that moment. And I think it's those kind of scenarios where I personally feel are more traumatic for me as a social worker, because I can't help. And I know all social workers want to do is help. We want to make things better. And sometimes you really can't make everything 100% better. And I know there's some questions on there about your colleagues and your interdisciplinary team, especially in healthcare. You need to really kind of be aware of that and know when you need to step back and recognize, well, maybe I'm getting a little burned out, or maybe this is a little tough, and, you know, I couldn't help him not see Germans that day.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, but I could sit with him, and I did. And you need to know where your limits are and when you really can't do anymore, and you really have done everything that you can.
yeah, I agree that self-care is extremely, extremely, extremely important, especially in this field. We tend to take on a lot. You know, the people that we see have a lot that they're coming to us with. So it's definitely important to take that time. I know, you know, there's a question coming up.
About supervision, yes.
Yeah, about that.
We can answer it now.
Okay.
We can talk about how supervision might help you through this.
Yes. So, you know, I meet with my coordinator once a week. Her phone is always open. Her phone line is always open. Her office, when she's there, is always open. And my team, we also have a coffee club that happens every month, the fourth Friday of every month. So we usually, you know, take our lunchtime and kind of sit down, and if we have any tough cases, we can just have that peer supervision and just discuss that during that time. So, you know, if the supervisor's not available, you know, colleagues are always available. I get phone calls all the time from a colleague who's an office door next, you know, over from me, calling to vent or to ask my opinion on something. So it's definitely helpful. We try to kind of assist each other.
Remind me of the question.
I was asking about secondary trauma, okay. You know, what you hear in session, how that affects you, what you do about it.
Great. I just want to get back to the original.
Yes.
So I definitely believe in secondary trauma. It's my own resistance throwing it out the window as we sit here, right? I'm like, what? No, I definitely believe in it. I pick it up sometimes on myself in my own behavior, or just kind of have a moment where I can feel the impact of that. But, you know, when I was here as a student, I heard so many times how important self-care was, and at the end of the day, you know, it's really an individual's choice when to listen or when to pursue that, which is great. But I hope you remember that. It's really important. This is a tough field, especially with veterans, especially confidentiality. You know what, when you go out with friends and you have and maybe you have dinner with friends or you meet new people and they ask what you do and you can hardly say anything at all. Or you say, I work at the VA as a social worker, and they're like, oh, that must be so tough. What's the worst thing you saw? And you're like, right? Here comes the secondary trauma. It's hard. I graduated in 2005. It's sometimes still hard for me to answer those questions. That's when the secondary trauma comes up, and that's when the caretaking, really comes up. I do have a supervisor that I meet with every week, as well as a team that I work with, and I do a lot of self-help stuff on the outside for myself to keep my side of the road clean, so that I could be, put my best foot forward. I will say this, and I hope it's not sharing too much, but just, from my own personal experience, I went to the counseling center when I was here as a student, and I had a positive experience, and I can advocate for that, truly. So, utilize the sources that are available to you, and, keeping up with those things, and the maintenance part is key to self-care.
What are some of the aspects of the job that surprised you, that were unexpected? Either things that you're doing or something that you encountered?
I'll go with that one. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
There are days where I mean, to be able to do something, they say if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, and it's really true. I go to work and I'm like, this is just fun. And don't get me wrong, it's work. But it's fun work. It's not, I never ever complain, oh, I can't believe this veteran's at my door asking me for help. Like, no, that's my job. Like, and I can help them. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's just a lot of fun. What was it, unexpected?
Unexpected.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun, and the camaraderie you build with your teammates. And I think that we each kind of work in different things where we have teams. That's a big government thing. But they really are a key part of your day, and you spend a lot of time with them, more time with them than your family. And where I work in the community living center, those veterans live there. So every day I go into their home, and they're my family. So I know if they're having a bad day, and they know if I'm having a bad day. They're like, Liz, not looking too happy this morning, and they'll make me laugh. And it's just, I think they say work's supposed to be fun, you're supposed to love what you do. I never really thought I was going to love it as much as I do. And I think it's a very pleasant surprise. Yeah. So.
I didn't expect it to be so similar to working with children. I just feel like it's the same set of issues. It's just a different end of the spectrum. So that surprised me a bit. So I kind of feel like I'm using a lot of the same skills that I did working with children, with adults. And just really realizing that that human touch, how powerful that is, a lot of these veterans just want to be heard, and they have stories, and they're not really looking for you to interpret their stories. They just want to share their stories. So that's been powerful as well, just hearing stories and being that person that's listening and not judging. So those are unexpected things.
I definitely agree with what both of you had to say. The fun time reminds me of definitely unexpected, but I was working in the inpatient psych, and sometimes it was really tough, and sometimes it was so funny. I would go up there, and they had a TV. I went up there that day that it's not funny, but they thought that boy was in that Jiffy Pop thing that was flying around that balloon or whatever. Oh yeah, I was on the psych unit that day. We had so much fun. I was like, hey guys, what do you think the military should do about this? Oh my gosh, they had the best ideas you ever heard. Well, they get two Blackhawks and they throw a net over and then they pull it in because the boy will fall into the net underneath. It was just really, you could have a good time with that. and they enjoyed it too. They were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're laughing this hard and we're in the psych unit. And I was like, yeah, well, it's hilarious. What can you do, you know? And so everything there, like, it doesn't, the bottom line is like the people that go there, they've seen a lot. So there's room for like the airy-fairy, not so much how does that make you feel kind of stuff, but just to have a good time. And a lot of the veterans, they're tied there. They feel that that place is their identity. So they spend many, many, many hours. Like outpatient, like I come for an hour, then I go home. The VA, some of them are there like all day, every day. There was like groups that I like went bowling with, or we would play basketball, recreation groups. It really kind of gives you this really nice way that you could expand and say like, okay, what's helpful more than just a psychotherapy group? You know, I had a movie group, and you could really expand in that kind of way, and that was like really surprising to see how different components of therapy can be embraced. And the other thing that I was really surprised and glad that I learned early on is like, in my experience, a veteran will always help another veteran. Like if I am really, really busy and have 10,000 things and blah, 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 rather than like doing something really quick or saying I can't do it or asking someone else, if I go to any patient in that hospital and say like, listen, I have a male veteran, I have a female veteran, maybe they're young, maybe they're old, they just came in, I feel like they really need my attention now. I know I have to see you, would you wait until I'm done, maybe an hour? They will always say yes. I mean, I've had people that literally were about to be discharged from the psych unit that will wait for me to help another veteran, because that camaraderie was like ingrained in them so long ago that all you really need to do is ask in this like very genuine kind of way, and they'll rally for one another, you know, and they want that. They want the VA not for them, but for everyone, which is so, so nice and so comforting, and it's helped me maintain my boundaries, that it's like much better to do a good job and all kind of pitch in together than like run around with like a chicken with your head cut off.
What kind of advice do you have for students that maybe they don't have an internship now at the VA? I know there's a few at the school, but what kind of advice do you have for them to choose maybe other internships that could be helpful experience for working for the VA, or what mini courses might have been good and helpful for you?
I'm involved in a lot of outside organizations that deal with veterans. I sit on an advisory board for women's veterans at the Mayor's Office of Veteran Affairs, which is very helpful, and a lot of different people from various organizations sit on that board along with me. Service Women's Action Network, just a lot of different ones. If you Google that kind of stuff, IAVA, I mean, all that stuff is really helpful, and it will put you, like, organizations like OutServe, they do a magazine. I mean, they all have a lot of information that could be helpful, and volunteering your time is a really great way to gain exposure to that.
I was going to actually say volunteering. Like I had said earlier, I had started with the VA as a volunteer, and I literally walked in off the street. I was in undergrad, and I said, hey, I want to work with veterans, and they said, okay, you know, well, do you have any experience? I said, absolutely not. I have no experience with veterans. I didn't even take a social work class at this point, because I was doing my undergrad, and they welcomed me with open arms. And I got to tell you, as someone that uses volunteers in my everyday work with my veterans, they are vital, and the VA needs volunteers, and that's where you don't have the time constraints and pressures of actually being a social worker there and having to see this many patients or having a caseload of 50. You have the time to really sit with them and get to know them and learn their little nuances and see how the VA works. And because even to become a volunteer, you have to go through a whole volunteer orientation, and you have to get fingerprinted, and it's a little glimpse into what it's like to really work for the VA. So in addition to what Heidi said about all those outside organizations, if you're particularly interested in the VA, I think volunteering is a really great way, and they are always needed.
And I co-sign on the volunteering. Definitely a great opportunity to have some experience and just kind of get in and see what's going on. And also to utilize social media. I feel like there's so many opportunities to connect with veteran organizations, especially in this time. Facebook, LinkedIn, also the NASW is great to get involved in. And MOVA as well, Mayor's Office of Veteran Affairs. They have a lot of programs geared towards helping veterans. So definitely Google it. Google veterans. And a lot of opportunities will come up. I know recently the way the VA is kind of moving now with the homeless program is contracting out to a lot of community agencies that are eventually going to be more involved in dealing with homeless vets, and they're called SSVF, Supportive Services for Veteran Families. So currently there's about 3 agencies that are involved with that: Help USA, and Samaritan Village, and Supportive Services for the Unserved. Those are agencies that are working with veterans that have a dedicated veteran program, and I'm sure that they'll welcome, students in, especially for your field placement. So, ask about it. So it's not just kind of exclusive to the VA, but there's a lot of supportive service programs that would help you.
Can you say again the 3 places,
Samaritan Village, Help USA, and Supportive SUS, Services for the Underserved.
Just to kind of add on to that, because we think that about contracting out.
Yeah.
The VA also, for our hospice services, if a veteran would like in-home hospice services, we contract out with community hospices, and I'm sure that's the same thing here in New York as it is in Maryland. And a lot of those hospices have a program called We Honor Veterans. And if you look at the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization's website, NHPCO, there should be a little link about We Honor Veterans, and it's a special set of programs that these community hospices are implementing to honor veterans and to identify them and see them as their own culture and their own set of needs. So even if you are interested in end-of-life care and you're working with a community hospice, that's one way to kind of tie in veterans and learn about them as a culture and learn about different ways to help them.
Have you encountered any difficulties or working with outside agencies, working private? How well do private sector agencies and government agencies work together? Any challenges?
Yes. Yeah, there are quite a bit of challenges, just because the federal government has a lot of, if they're going to be given money, they have a lot of rules to follow. Mm-hmm. So what ends up happening is that when you have community agencies that kind of have their own idea and want to make their own stamp, it becomes a little difficult because they want to do things their own way, mm-hmm. but they also want the resources of the federal government. So we end up kind of butting heads sometimes, but it's getting better, and especially in the last 5 years or so, I feel like the VA is making a huge effort to really brand itself and get out the word that it's a different VA than it was 20, 30 years ago. So a lot of these agencies are realizing that, and they're more willing to work with the VA, and so that's where things are moving.
To kind of piggyback on that, I think that outside organizations realize the VA is big money and it's government money, and they have a big population. And I think that, sometimes they do want to make it on their own terms, and to get a government contract, you have to do things a certain way. But I also realize, the VA always doesn't think from like a business standpoint, which is sometimes an issue, but those outside agencies do, and they understand that working with the VA is it's good business for them, and they're helping veterans, which a lot of people like to do. So I think it is getting better. But there are a lot of guidelines and things they need to follow.
Do you want to add anything?
My role really isn't that so much. I have someone, Hudvesh, that works at the Harlem Clinic, so mine is mostly like getting the referrals, not sending the referrals, so I don't feel like, you know, I don't feel like based on my experience I could really give a good, solid answer for that.
But it's a good source of referrals for you, having that connection with the
Yeah,
private.
and I support them.
Well, I had one more technical question, and then I'm going to open up the floor to questions. So start having your question machine working. And you're working in Maryland now. You start here. You're working in Maryland now. And Shaun was talking about going to a friend that went to Hawaii, which I'm still thinking about. Right. Is there any issue in terms of your state licensing and that sort of thing when you're moving around? And does the federal government help you?
I can definitely speak to that.
Yes.
For the VA, this is very important to know. If you are licensed in one state, you are licensed in anywhere you go in the VA. So when I left New York, I had my LMSW. When I went to Maryland, I worked there with my LMSW. It was actually easier to get my LCSW there. That's why I actually got a Maryland license now. My New York license is still active, but I was able to transfer with my Maryland license, and there was no problems whatsoever, which is fantastic. So if you did want to go to Hawaii and you had your New York license, that would be okay, but you just need to keep it active in that state, and you need to maintain if there are any requirements. So for example, in New York, you don't have continuing education for your license, but in Maryland, I need to do 40 hours every 2 years. So if I move to Florida and I want to keep my Maryland license, I still need to do my continuing education credits.
So the thing that I'll say about that piece, not so much about transferring, but when I did graduate school, I was like real young. I know I still have this lovely youthful appearance. No joke, like I graduated in 2005, and I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, school is over forever. And I like had was supporting myself to come here as well, so that was a big deal. And the kickback of that was I procrastinated taking my L for a year, which was not a great idea. And just to say, you know, take it or leave it, but that followed me. Like, I then had to wait to get my C, then that delayed me getting my R. So like, if you can take it, I'll just tell you my experience. What did seem like a big deal at the time, like now everything's cool, but like it snowballs. Like if you wait like 6 months or something, then know that you can't take your C. And then I like had to rush because they changed the test. So I registered in like 2 weeks and took it. And so just like, you know, mine was like a lesson well learned the hard way. But just thought I'd share it. There's fair reason to like take it as soon as you can.
It's not that bad, I promise.
Yeah, it's not that
It's
bad.
really not.
If you're working, like you'll know the stuff. You'll be like.
All right. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hand. I'll call on you. Over there in the corner.
Shaun, can you explain what you meant about in terms of working with veterans, how it's similar to working with children? What aspects?
Well, working for ACS, you know, I was dealing with children who were suffering from trauma, families that were suffering from trauma. The whole idea of grief, loss, similar kind of concepts that veterans are dealing with. You know, they're dealing with trauma, they're dealing with grief, they're dealing with loss. A lot of them, you know, have lost, you know, partners that they were in the service with. I have quite a few Vietnam vets now who kind of dealt with, they came back, they weren't really treated well. They dealt with the drug epidemic. Now they're at later stages in life where they kind of want to live the rest of their life well, the right way, you know. So there's this reformation that's happening now with them. That's interesting to see. So in the sense of just really kind of going through traumatic events, children having gone through that and having to kind of, you know, find ways to cope and deal with grief and loss of a parent or parents, family members. So that's what I meant as far as similarities.
So my passion is post-traumatic stress disorder, in both combat and non-combat, which is obviously epidemic. And so I'm wondering, I mean, I'm sure all of you see veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder every day, but I'm wondering if there's how you can speak to specific opportunities to work with that illness, and if you know anything about that within the VA.
Aside from the fact that there's like PTSD clinic at the VA and PTSD unit, I mean, I would just encourage everyone to kind of understand that like that is something that in large part will come into play in various social work fields, you know, whether you're at the VA or not. No, I can't give you a guarantee in terms of like call this name and number and you know, I wish I could, honestly. But I will say this in terms of PTSD, I always explain a few things to people. Number one, and this is the engagement phase of PTSD, is that one thing that people can argue with, if you're in the process of engaging someone and you suspect that they have it, one thing people really can argue with is history and science. So if you find someone's difficult to engage, know your history of PTSD treatment, okay? The way that I usually explain it, and I'm gonna honestly and truly encourage anyone, including my fellow panelists, to respond to this if you feel like this is inaccurate because it's just my own take on it. When people came home from Vietnam, there was a tremendous focus being placed on like, tell the war stories, tell the war stories, tell the war stories, because there was a belief that that was gonna burn out the synapse in the brain. And what they realized decades later was that that's not true. That telling the war stories again and again and again and again and again in a group of your peers, in large part for many people, will re-traumatize the person. And they saw that there was very little progress. Now, there are different, and some people really, I shouldn't say there was very little progress, but for some people they like remain what social workers like to call as stuck. So now there's all different PTSD basically evaluations and treatments that revolve around the coping skills. Okay, when are you triggered? When you're triggered, what happens? What do you do to move away from the trigger? And to understand what triggers mean in large part, which is like I could walk outside and walk by the same thing every day, and one day it triggers me terribly. But to know that if I kind of divert myself to this and I have a good therapeutic base, I don't have to say, oh, I always have to take the long way home because I can never walk by that corner again. In fact, it might not affect you tomorrow, but for today, I'm triggered. I can talk about it with my group or with my therapist, use my coping skills, and there's acceptance behind it rather than just with the war stories, you know. That also has opened up like a large other branches like TBI, traumatic brain injury, what's the difference? MST, military sexual trauma, what's the difference with that? So in terms of getting a real holistic approach to that kind of stuff, it's really important looking at PTSD and the evolution of treatment and the evolution of treatment modalities. And can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
I always, you know, sometimes people are difficult to engage, and they're always, you know, there's like the empathetic way or the compassionate way to engage them, but I always, you know, remember there's also a scientific way to engage them. So sometimes if people are new to treatment and they don't like that, oh, how does that make you feel type social work, you know, I let them know this is just my explanation of it. This is how the brain works. I for one, since I've been to the VA, have been fascinated with associations in the brain, right? I wrote an article on this, by the way, which I brought. Coincidentally. You know, you have like one military term and then you have the civilian term, and they both react in the brain differently, you know, and so if I hear the bell of a Mr. Softy truck, I immediately think of like a vanilla ice cream cone melting in the sun in the park. I can taste it, I could smell it, you know, it has sprinkles on it, whatever. But like bell and like ice cream, two separate things, right? So with PTSD, what happens is if you are triggered or you have association, it goes into the brain. The brain is like a hard drive and it goes all through the folds of your brain and this and that. And generally, although there are exceptions, the remote data is stored higher up in the brain, and which is the short term, and the long term is lower. So the association links into the memory. The memory is then brought up. You re-experience the memory. Every time you re-experience the memory, it's something different. When you re-experience the memory, it creates a protein in the brain, and the protein in the brain goes on top of the memory and sinks it back down. That's why, like, if, say for example, you've been trying to remember something for a year, and then you like can't remember it, and then when you finally do, you're more apt to remember it again. People know what I mean? So if that happens and you have any history of trauma, including PTSD, at the point where it links into the brain and it pulls it up, before it gets pushed down, that trauma may in fact send it haywire and send it to other places and send it to other sensations of the body. You could even raise your temperature, your blood pressure before it gets pressed down. And in that way, we can teach our veterans or anyone with that the re-experiencing of it needs to be different in order to self-soothe before we push that back down into the brain. So I know it's not like a direct answer, but sometimes when I explain that to people, all of a sudden now you're interested in treatment because it wasn't, you know, oh, could you tell me your experiences? It's like this really scientific way of like, oh, that does kind of make sense, and it gives fair voice to their experience from like a scientific way rather than like, you know, a so-called like emotional way.
It's more concrete.
Thank you. That's perfect. Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
I just,
I'm
sorry, just one more thing for you about PTSD. The VA, just to kind of piggyback up, but the VA is the largest employer of social workers in the country. That being said, it's very hard to get a job with the VA. But also saying that, where I live in Baltimore, Maryland, I'm close to Washington, D.C., and there are a lot of different organizations that are kind of collaborating with the government in terms of like PTSD research and research for veterans and military families as well. I'm going to plug the military families here because those are our future veterans. So just to throw some names out there, and you can go on their websites because they're maybe hiring social workers as well, and it's another way to kind of get in the government and learn about veterans and PTSD and military families. There's something called the Defense Center for Excellence, and they put on a trauma spectrum conference every year, which is phenomenal. It's a 2-day conference, and it's free, keyword free. So last year was 2 years ago was in DC. Last year I think it was somewhere on the West Coast, so it should be coming back to the East Coast. There's also something called the Risk Center. It stands for War-Related Illness Injury Research Center. They're scattered throughout VAs in the U.S., but they do a lot of PTSD research. And I would also encourage you to look at the National Institute of Health. That's down by me too. But they also do a lot of research, and they hire social workers. So there are different ways you can kind of get involved in PTSD or trauma or traumatic brain injuries, not just with the VA. And you know, you may be working with military families, but still doing PTSD work and things like that. So that's just another way.
Could you say again the second place that you mentioned, war-related something?
It's the acronym is WRIISC, War-Related Illness and Injury Research Center. And that's a VA program. But I went to one of their conferences too, which was also free, 2-day conference. And it was fascinating, and that's where you'll hear about some of the things about the iPhone apps, and you know, they have these stores set up where they'll take people through them, and they really kind of walk you through how to live your life day by day for some of, you know, active duty members that are just coming back and things like that. So I think they're worth looking into if you're interested in this field.
The 2 free conferences was the Trauma Spectrum Conference?
The Trauma Spectrum Conference, which was put on by the Defense Center of Excellence and the VA. It was a collaboration. And then the other one was the RISC, the WRIISC, War-Related Illness and Injuries research center. A lot of
Also-
acronyms.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I also just wanted to, PTSD is a great area to really kind of get training on, if you can. Just because it's what we're dealing with, what we're going to be dealing with, is very unique in the sense that the current veterans, OEF, OIF, are much different than the Vietnam vets, the World War II vets, just because they've had multiple tours. So, you have vets who have been back 3, 4, 5 times. So the experience of that PTSD is going to kind of manifest itself in different ways. And then also PTSD with women. There are more women in service now who are also dealing with PTSD. So I know that there's a great thing about the VAs, because we are we employ most social workers. The research around these things, we're kind of at the forefront of all of those things. So prolonged exposure therapy is something that the VA is really kind of focused on and using, especially with women veterans, along with some cognitive work. And Liz had mentioned TBI, which is it's another issue that we're dealing with, along with PTSD, with traumatic brain injury. What's different with the veterans now is that in the past, now we have more armor that allows soldiers to live longer, but where years ago they would have died, they're now living with injuries that they would have died from before. Hence the traumatic brain injury. That you're going to see that a lot more often now. And what the VA is doing is that they have centers that they're placing in different VAs where they'll have a social worker directly linked to the TBI patient and working with them directly. So each TBI patient will have their own social worker who's just focused on them. So there's a lot of innovation that's happening in the VA, especially around PTSD and traumatic brain injury. So if you can get training in that, if you can go to workshops on it, please do.
We had a question over here that I didn't.
I was wondering, if there's an opportunity to work with families, or what, I know lots of you said that veterans came in and they some of them lived there, some of them just hung out all the time. But in terms of working with family gestures, families or family therapy, or what is that?
I can talk about in my setting, and I did work in acute care, which is like the medicine, so that time you're always working with families. In terms of family therapy, I think it may be a little bit different in the outpatient setting in terms of billing, because the VA still bills and codes things. But where I am in a community living residence, I work mostly with the families. And we'll do impromptu family therapy sessions, or we'll schedule them with the veteran and their families, especially in end-of-life care. There's family meetings all the time. So so you are kind of working jointly with the veteran and the family. Issues sometimes come after, in my setting, after the veteran dies. If they need prolonged grief services or bereavement services, I'm not able to provide that. Some of our vet centers, which are a little bit different from the VA, they're part of the VA, but they're a little bit different. I would encourage you to kind of look up them on the VA's website to learn a little bit more about them. They do bereavement services, but while they are on my unit, I do work with the families quite a bit. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, not necessarily everything involves family, but I just
Yeah, there's for some of my veterans, a wife will call me maybe every other day, and I'll talk to her for 20 minutes. That's family therapy.
Right.
That's what she needs at that moment, and we do that.
What was your question?
I have, 2 questions. The first is, do you know of any postgraduate opportunities to work on PTSD or anything related to that? do they exist in
Yeah,
here?
absolutely. I know the NASW definitely has trainings.
That's the one
So,
they're working on, I think.
yeah, they're currently working on one. And do you guys know?
Not off the top of my head specifically for PTSD. If you want to know about end of life, I can tell you those.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know any, I know a few for like therapy or group therapy, but if you, or anyone, you know, if you want to communicate via email after this, I'd be happy to put it out to my peers that work directly in those clinics and find out if they know anything or help you make that connection.
And if you could also go to the National Center, I think it's the National Center for PTSD, ncptsd.va.gov.
Did you have a second question? Or?
Yeah, I was wondering, what do you think, because I understand it is very hard to get work with the VA, what do you think they are looking for?
Having your license is definitely going to make you more eligible. Having your C makes you more eligible to the one with the L. And making connections within the VA.
Are you finished? Sorry. I just, don't be discouraged. I just want to say you're absolutely right. I think it's easier for the VA to kind of take you on if you have your C and all that stuff. But I got hired unlicensed. You have to get your license within a certain number of years. You know, I didn't have my license. I got hired in September and I got my license in December. So, but the key is that I knew people. I went out there, I gave out my resume, I made connections. And, you know, they do a lot of times we'll hire interns because we know the person. We know how you work. We know what you want to do. And I've sat on hiring panels, and a lot of the times, if you have two candidates that are equal on paper, it's the enthusiasm. It's the wanting to learn about veterans, wanting to be a part of the VA. You don't have to know everything. No one knows everything, but having that willingness to learn, I think, is good. And you know us now, so I'm sure both of you will be fine giving out your emails and contacting us, say, hey, I'm relocating to Baltimore, do you have any job openings? And I would definitely send them on to you. And it's those kind of things that I think kind of give you a heads up.
Can you get, if you have just the L, can you get the kind of position where you would be getting the supervision towards the C?
In most places, yes, but something a little kooky about the VA is that certain positions you have to have your like LCSW for. And it goes in a GS level system without getting too crazy about it. But entry level, you don't need your license, but if, it's like a 9/11. If you look you could Google government pay scales and you'll understand a little bit more about that. But if you want a 12 position and you don't have your C, you're not eligible for it. So there are certain positions that you won't be eligible for, but there are positions that are entry level.
So does everyone know the hiring website for federal government? It's usajobs.gov. So a lot of that is like, it's like bullet point question and answer kind of stuff. So like, they ask you about your experience and you answer honestly, but a lot of those, it's like a point system. And that's why in terms of like having your C or other things, it's really important. I do want to say two things about that. One is that for me, who graduated in 2005, in a really compassionate way, I want to let you know that like the beast that y'all are facing is very different than when I got out. And I hear that.
What do you mean by that?
What you guys are experiencing and trying to find employment is very different. I mean, when I got out, people weren't even applying for jobs online. I applied for a job at a paper resume at a graduate fair. And I know that these positions are really competitive. I mean, that was 7 years ago, and I hear your concern, and I know that. And it's not to scare you in any way, but just to let you know, you guys are going to be the pioneers at this. I hope one day when you're sitting in the seat, you can say, I went online and I did this and I did that, but if I'm a little bit at a loss for words, I know intellectually, I don't know personally, what the challenge is here. I will say this, and it's not to like gloat or self-promote, but the one thing that I learned in terms of technology, even though for me, even still this thing I'm like still trying to set up my iPhone for 2 months now, is like, it used to be, I wrote this article, it was so much easier than I ever thought. I went to like a colleague of ours who I really trust for help, and I literally submitted it to like 3 or 4 places, and it was picked up within like 2 days. You know, it used to be that you had to know people and ask and get put on a list with 5 other doctors and do all this empirical data, and those articles still exist. You're probably gonna go home tonight and study for your finals and read them, and they're great. But if you're interested in something and you feel like you have that experience, write about it, blog about it, Google it, send it to places. And when you walk in for your interview, you can say, yes, and by the way, I published this article, and it's easier than you probably think.
Well, it's been wonderful to have you here, and we're almost at the end, and I was wondering if we could just get like maybe a minute or 2 minutes of a closing thought or a bit of advice from each of you for the students that are here.
Take advantage of the resources here at NYU. You're at what I consider the premier social work school in the world. So definitely take advantage of the resources here, the staff, the faculty. Because it definitely helps once you leave here, having those connections and having those resources moving forward.
Try not to be overwhelmed with everything that you're learning now and theories and research, and because when you go out there, I think one of the most important thing you do with your work with your clients is just starting where they are and reading them. And I think if your heart's in the right spot, all that other stuff is important, and it'll come. Your researching skills will come, making those connections will come. But don't try to get so. When I graduated, I was so scared. Well, I don't remember this theory and what kind of theoretical framework am I doing this therapy on, and it clogs your mind. If you just come from the genuine place of that you want to help them and that you're doing social work because of that reason, you'll be fine. I promise.
Buy wrinkle-resistant work shirts. I wish someone told me that in graduate school. It took forever for me to like figure it out, and I'm like, these things are great, man. So you have more time for self-care and less time to iron your laundry. You know, I do want to say that when she said before that she wished that, you know, there was another year of education, I want to echo that. And I thought it was so hard when I was here, and I really wish every day that I stayed another year. Your education here will be enough. You don't have to be the best student or get straight A's or know now that it will be enough, but I guarantee you it will be enough. Mine was enough. It was plentiful. It came through me in this really beautiful, organic way, and I cherish it so greatly now. I don't even have the words. It was worth every penny that I worked waiting tables at TGI Fridays and I flare in a bucket cap visor for it will be enough, and know that when you have it, you'll be enough and you'll have enough, and it's just a matter of time until you know, you're sitting in these seats and giving back today.
Thank you so much for coming here.